All right. We were talking about generational differences yesterday and managing people of different generations and the challenges that might come with that. When it comes to managing people that have different uh, cultural backgrounds or were raised at different times or have different life experiences, always provides some sort of a challenge. But it's expected that a manager thinks about these things and is aware of them and is treating each person respectfully based on their differences. So, our generations, we have the baby boomers, which was the increase of uh, larger growing families, more births, then a bust, baby bust. Then we get into the Generation Y and Generation Z. Remember that those dates change based on your source. But we're reaching a point where those baby boomers are starting to retire, which is going to impact our um, job market. All right, the final thing within our first PowerPoint is discussing how populations are moving and transitioning from different parts of the country and why they do that. So, as Americans, we are people that constantly move. You may have had a friend at one point in time move. Um, People jump from city to city for many different reasons. But on average, one out of every 7 Americans will change their address within a year. Now, most people you know that move probably move within their city or pretty close, maybe even within their state. But there is a trend that people are leaving and going long distances from one city to another. So when they move those long distances, we start to actually break down the country into different parts, and we'll talk about some of those parts. The first one's called the Frost Belt, which, as you can guess, these are the colder states, which we know to be in the north and the northeast mainly. In the United States, the very northwest corner or the northeast corner is where we start to see some of the bigger populations within um, cities within that part of the country. Kind of the central north area, we see states like Montana and North Dakota, states that typically have pretty small populations. So we're talking about the northeast, possibly um, the northwest corner as well. The Sun Belt is kind of the opposite. These are the warmer states in the south and southwest. So something to keep in mind is that businesses really do um, control where certain populations end up. So certain factories opening up in a city is going to lead to a growth of that city as employees or people seeking work will move to that area in search of that job. It could also be that a company moves from one city to another, and the people who had previously worked for that company will follow that company into that new area. Most people that you know that have moved, probably the number one reason is because their mom or dad got a new job, and that was what took them to a new location. It's smart for businesses to locate themselves where their customers are. Um, More customers means better business for them, and if they can get their product or service to their customer in an easier way, that saves a whole lot of time and shipping costs. So one example here, there's another location we'll talk about, which is the Rust Belt. Um, and the Rust Belt is kind of north central. Okay, so like Detroit, places where typically we saw lots of factories. Pittsburgh would be kind of considered in this area. So one of the reasons they call it the Rust Belt, manufacturing, steel, that sort of stuff. A lot of those companies have spread out. So if you know the history of the United States, a lot of cars used to be made in the Michigan, Detroit area, but a lot of those factories have moved throughout the country, or we've also started buying cars from companies that are overseas. So factories are relocated to the southeastern states where wage rates are lower than they were in the Rust Belt, and that's where we used to have our major manufacturing, but that transition has changed. There is definitely a downside to a company leaving a city. One example I always talk about is Cabela's. There was a recent time where we thought Cabela's might have to completely just shut its doors as Bass Pro Shops kind of took over ownership. And in Sidney, Nebraska, if you've ever been out there, that's their headquarters for Cabela's, where it was started. If that business was to leave that town, okay, a really big number of the population of people in that town work for that company in some way. So if they were to just up and leave, that would really strongly affect that city. Lots of people would lose their jobs, meaning they'd have to move, which if they have to move, other companies like restaurants would lose business as well, and that affects kind of everybody down the way. Another issue here is if these jobs leave, you see poverty kind of take over that area, and that can increase crime as well, and cities can kind of go downhill. So this is how businesses affect populations and cities around the country.